Well, joining us now, the senior Congress leader Manish Tewari. Manish also writes extensively on national security issues, and it's great to have him in this regard. The bottom line over here, the issue of employment. Are you convinced that after 4 years, young men and women out of Agnipath will be getting jobs? Manish, you're on mute.
I say thank you very much for having me on your show. The fact is that the concerns which have been articulated by young people across the country in protests, which unfortunately have turned violent, which they shouldn't have, is a legitimate concern that what is the transition path available to them once they complete the mandatory 4.5 years in the armed forces. And therefore, I think it is mandatory for the government to build into the scheme that there would be a certain quota which would be reserved for such people in the paramilitary forces and the state police forces on an institutional basis. And plus, there would be other forms of employment which would be made available to them. So I guess that.
But they've done that, Manish.
Well, I think then under those circumstances, they need to communicate it effectively. But Vishnu, there is a far, far more important and fundamental point involved. And that important and fundamental point is that the nature of warfare has completely transformed itself, especially in the past decade. And all across the world, if you look at armed forces, now going back 3 decades, there has been a move towards having a more mobile, expeditionary force, which is more technology reliant, which relies on latest weaponry. So therefore, under those and plus which has a younger age profile. So this is a reform which is actually a much required reform, primarily because you need a leaner force, and plus whether you like it or not, the burgeoning pension bill because of one rank, one pension, I think is also something which must have gone into the calculus of the government. So if you look at the sum total of all the factors which possibly came to bear when the government announced this particular scheme, in my humble estimation, this is a reform in the right direction.
Well, Manish, that's interesting because Rahul Gandhi has opposed it. And so I'm just trying to understand, obviously it's your own opinion and the Congress party allows different opinions, etc., etc. But the party line is that this is not something that works out. I'm curious to know if it's been spoken about or discussed in the party.
Well, Vishnu, may I take you back to the book which I released?
Give me 30 seconds, Manish. Sorry. When India faces threats on 2 fronts, the uncalled for Agnipath scheme reduces the operational effectiveness of our armed forces. The BJP government must stop compromising the dignity, traditions, valor and discipline of our forces, is what Rahul Gandhi tweeted yesterday.
Well, Vishnu, allow me to take you back to the book which I had released in December, which you were so kind enough to moderate. In that, there is a chapter which extensively deals with civil-military relations and army recruitment, or the recruitment into the armed forces as an important subset of that chapter. Now, if you go back all the way to even before 1857, when the British started occupying India, they essentially had a Bombay army, a Calcutta army, and a Madras army. And these were essentially upper caste Hindus who were recruited into these armed forces. Post 1850, or when the 1857 War of Independence happened, at that point in time, since the revolt was led by the Bengal army or sepoys of the Bengal army, the British wanted to shift the stomping grounds of their recruitment. And then the Jonathan Peel Commission came into existence, and 1859 onwards, they coined this theory of a martial race and started recruiting on that basis by identifying 15 martial races. And so therefore, between 1880 and 1945, the end of the Second World War, there was massive recruitment from Delhi all the way to the Khyber Pass, which is also called the Punjabiization of the army in Pakistan. And that is how, these caste-based regiments got established, primarily because of this martial race theory.
Sure.
We tried to crack that in 1966. By the recruitable male population paradigm of recruitment into the armed forces. So therefore, under those circumstances, between 66 and 2022, there is a lot which has changed. And one thing which needs to be kept in mind is that the armed forces of the Union are not an employment guarantee program. The armed forces of the Union have a responsibility to protect and defend the unity and integrity of the country. And so therefore, in today's day and age, you need a younger army, you need a mobile army, you need more expenditure on technology, on weaponry, and that's not going to come if you have a very heavy footprint on the ground, and that's where the bulk of your money is going to go. So having said that, if there are people who have concerns because they want to adopt the armed forces as a career, the government must kind of build into the scheme itself those statutory pathways or those transitionary pathways, which can then give them that comfort that you are not going to be, thrown out after 4 years.
Sure. All right, Manish, thanks so much for, sharing those thoughts. I think I agree entirely. We need a leaner force. But I think many would suggest that the recruitment structure of the armed forces is okay. Money needed to have been found for technology and new weapon systems elsewhere. We'll discuss this later. Thanks very much, Manish, for joining us.
Thank you.